Aston Villa have sacked manager Steven Gerrard after a dismal run of form which has seen the Midlands club gather only 2 wins from their first 11 Premier League games. The former Rangers boss had been on the brink for a number of weeks, but was somewhat aided by his team's spirited performance, albeit in a defeat, last weekend against Chelsea. But after suffering a miserable 3-0 loss to newly promoted Fulham on Thursday night, in a game which featured a Villa red card, penalty concession and an own goal, the hierarchy at the club moved swiftly to end his tenure just 11 months after taking the helm. We would like to thank Steven for his hard work and commitment, a club spokesman said, and wish him well for the future. So Steven Gerrard has become the 4th manager to be sacked in the Premier League this term. To be honest, it's not a surprise. We've kind of seen it coming, considering where they are in the league, considering what their expectations were coming into this campaign. So where did it go wrong? Where does it leave Gerrard? Where does it leave Villa? Let's talk about it. Steven Gerrard replaced Dean Smith in November last year, and that came off the back of 5 defeats in a row for Villa, 7 in their first 11 games. And Gerrard was coming to a Villa club 3.5 years into his time at Rangers, where, as we know, he delivered Rangers their first Scottish Premiership title in over a decade. And it really made sense for his career progression. The open secret has been that Gerrard wants to manage Liverpool Football Club. That's been pretty clear since the day he retired. And so managing in Scotland, doing really well up there, the next logical step was to test yourself down south in the Premier League, the best league in the world. And he started pretty well. He won his first couple of games, and the games that he lost were against Liverpool and Manchester City, 2 narrow defeats, but Villa played well in both of those games. By the middle of December, Villa were in mid-table. Unfortunately, their form after that point was largely inconsistent. By the end of the season, they finished in a disappointing spot, 14th place, and their last 11 games, they only won twice, a mirror image of the start of this campaign. On the systems front, Gerrard initially opted to go for a 4-3-3, but after the summer acquisitions of Luca Dean and especially Philip Coutinho, Gerrard switched to a 4-4-2, a narrow 4-4-2 with a diamond, essentially so that Philip Coutinho could play that number 10 role and work his magic just behind Ollie Watkins and Danny Ings up top. Villa also had Matty Cash as right back and Luca Dean as left back, providing all the width, bombing up and down the left and right flanks. On occasion, Gerrard also opted for Carlo Ancelotti's Christmas tree formation. He revived it, what Ancelotti used so successfully at AC Milan. In that configuration, either Watkins or Ings would drop back into that cam position, that less advanced position, or even Leon Bailey would come in and help as well. What you see when you look at Villa's XG compared to their XG against since Gerrard has taken over is a tale of a very inconsistent side. It's somewhat understandable for a team in their situation, not a big 6 club. And when you look and you compare their expected goals to their expected goals against, you see these wild sparks, and that's often when they play the top 6 opposition, particularly when they've played against Manchester City or Liverpool. But what we have seen from about game 11 in Gerrard's tenure is a general increase in the expected goals against, and similarly a decrease in the expected goals for. Comparing Villa in this time to 2 teams like West Ham and Newcastle, I think is quite instructive. West Ham, because West Ham finished 7th last season, and that's the very least where Villa want to be. And Newcastle, who started last season pretty poorly, but ever since Eddie Howe's been at the helm, have been great and currently sit just outside the top 4. Similarly, with these 2 sides, you see the wild sparks, but the trends go in the right direction for West Ham and Newcastle. Newcastle especially, whose XG against has been largely trending downwards. Villa started the season in a bad way. It got off to a pretty bad start from the get-go. 2 games into their campaign, the first game of which they lost to newly promoted Bournemouth. They beat Everton, but one of their new summer signings, Diego Carlos, who signed from Sevilla, ruptured his Achilles. That meant that Tyrone Mings came back into the squad, a regular starter the year before, but Gerrard had attempted to phase him out. had even stripped him of the captaincy and given it to John McGinn, and that provided fresh spark, unwanted spark in the dressing room. Another summer signing, Boubacar Kamara, who signed from Marseille, a quality midfielder. He also sustained an injury and has missed the past 4 or 5 games. Luca Dean, who has shown himself to be a really good Premier League defender, has not shown himself to be able to stay on the pitch all that often, and he's been missing as well. And Philippe Coutinho has produced a lot less than the Villa faithful hoped for. Take yesterday's defeat to Fulham as an example. A real dismal end to a disappointing spell for Gerrard. Villa were dominated on the ball. They had 40% possession compared to Fulham's 60. No big chances. 311 passes compared to Fulham's 482. And only 77% passing accuracy. Villa are currently 17th in the league, only outside of the relegation zone by way of their goals scored, 7 compared to Wolves' 5. And they have the second worst XG in the division. So where did it all go wrong? In my opinion, there are 4 key reasons why it didn't work for Gerrard at Villa. The first is the spectre of Jack Grealish. I know that he left a season and a half ago, but his departure definitely played a part in Dean Smith's dismissal. And we've seen with teams like Spurs, when they attempted to replace Gareth Bale after they received the world record fee from Real Madrid, bringing in a load of players to replace the impact of one talismanic figure often doesn't work. And this Villa team looks like a side with players who don't know each other all that well, and they haven't been helped by the second reason, which is injuries. I know we don't like to make these kind of excuses. Injuries happen to every single side, but I do think it's fair to say that Gerrard has been hampered in not being able to field the team that he would have wanted, been able to play the players that he spent so much money on over the summer. The third big reason, and this has been spoken about a bit, especially because this man has been in the news this week, is the departure of Mick Beale. Mick Beale was Gerrard's assistant manager at Rangers and at Villa, but left in the summer to go and manage QPR and has been brilliant. QPR are currently top of the Championship, and Mick Beale has recently turned down the chance to manage Wolverhampton Wanderers to stay with the London club. Now, it's overstating the mark, I would say, to assume that the only reason Villa have been so poor this season has been his departure. As we've seen, their run of bad form kind of started 11 games into last season, but you would assume it definitely has had an impact, especially because his replacement, Neil Critchley, is apparently someone who's not as much of a details-oriented guy as Mick Beale was. The last one is just inexperience. This is a manager in Gerrard who has managed only 258 games. And with all due respect to his experience at Rangers and the Scottish Premiership, that did not prepare him for the challenge he faced at Villa. The mandate at Rangers was to win a league title, and they did that brilliantly. But the vast majority of games that Gerrard and his side would have gone into, they were the overwhelming favourites. They overmatched their opponents. That wasn't the case at Villa. That's not the case in the Premier League, in what is the toughest league in the world. So where does Gerrard go from here? As I said before, the path that Gerrard was carving out in pursuit of his ultimate aim to be Liverpool manager now seems impassable. So I think there's only really 3 options for him. None of them are great, though. The first one is managing in the Championship. I think this is the riskiest option because I don't think Gerrard has shown himself to be a manager who would be particularly adept at managing at the lower levels. We know that he enjoys to have a big backroom staff. He doesn't really get in the weeds and focus on the on-field stuff. He leaves that to some of his better equipped coaches. And I don't know how well that would work in the lower divisions. I could be wrong, but just imagine if Gerrard was managing Norwich City, for example, and it went badly. His prospects from that point would be infinitely worse than they are today. Another option is managing another Premier League side should he be given the opportunity. There are quite a few teams who are in a similar situation to Villa. That point is interesting because why would those clubs give Gerrard the opportunity? But regardless, I'm thinking of Leicester, I'm thinking of Southampton in Brendan Rodgers and Ralph Hasenhüttl, who have been under pressure respectively. You've also got Wolves and Bournemouth who are looking for managers. But as I said, I don't think Gerrard has shown himself particularly able to get a team out of such dire straits. The last option, the best option, in my opinion, but also the least likely option probably, is for him to move abroad. You look at the Bundesliga, for example, a league that has proven itself to be a nice landing ground for British exports in recent years. And there are two big teams, Borussia Dortmund and RB Leipzig, who are not performing as they would have expected at the minute. I know it is increasingly unlikely. RB Leipzig normally get their managers from the Red Bull conveyor belt, would probably have managed Salzburg beforehand, and Borussia Dortmund are really just at the beginning of their project with Edin Terzic, and despite their disappointing league position right now, they are doing quite well in the Champions League. So I wouldn't expect any of those jobs to open up for Steven Gerrard. But in an ideal world, that would be perfect. You've just seen his former teammate Xabi Alonso take the Bayer Leverkusen job without any managerial experience to speak of beforehand. I think that would give Gerrard an unbelievable opportunity to work on himself, to get more games under his belt, and to see where he can go from here, because ultimately he faces a really tricky position right now. He's at a massive crossroads for his career, and only time will tell, not just whether he's able to manage Liverpool, but whether he can be a manager who manages at the very highest level and matches his playing days with his managerial ones. I guess we'll have to see.